History is not written by the victors alone. It is also carved into the mountains by the footsteps of the defiant. It echoes in the valleys where empires were brought to their knees. Our story begins in a place where nature itself wages war. High in the frozen peaks of the Alps, a brutal, unforgiving world of ice and stone. Here, storm clouds gather, dark and heavy with menace. They are a reflection of the storm gathering in the heart of one man, a storm of vengeance that would soon break upon the most powerful empire the world had ever known. The Roman Republic. This is the story of the mind that broke an empire. Against the fury of the heavens, an army marches. But this is no ordinary army. It is a force driven by a singular will. Men from distant lands, hardened by battle, push through blinding snow. And with them, creatures of legend. War elephants, giants of a warmer world, trudge through the biting cold. Their ghostly shapes move through the blizzard, their calls lost in the howling wind. Each step is a struggle against death. Each breath is a victory. They are led not by a king born to a throne, but by a general forged in the fires of hatred and loss. His name is Hannibal Barca, a name that would become a whisper of fear in the halls of Roman power. A name that would symbolize military genius for millennia to come. We see him now not as the legend, but as the man. Riding at the head of his weary column, his face is etched with determination. He looks out over the endless white expanse, a seemingly impassable barrier between him and his destiny. But for Hannibal, this is not just a mountain range. It is the gateway to his sacred purpose, a purpose sworn in his youth, a promise made to his father. This journey is more than a military campaign. It is the culmination of a lifelong obsession, an act of defiance on a scale the world had never witnessed. Rome believed itself to be invincible, protected by its legions, and the very mountains that now stood in Hannibal's path. They could not imagine an enemy who would dare to challenge nature itself to reach them. They did not understand the power of an oath of eternal hatred, an oath that set in motion a war that would shake the foundations of civilization and define an era of epic conflict. To understand the man who crossed the Alps, we must travel back in time, back to the sun-drenched shores of Carthage, back to a moment that shaped a boy into a warrior. We see a young Hannibal, no older than 9. He stands before a sacrificial altar, the air thick with the scent of incense and blood. His father, Hamilcar Barca, a revered general after the First Punic War. Hamilcar looks down at his son, eyes filled with solemn fire. He's about to leave for Hispania. He asks the boy if he wishes to come. The young Hannibal eagerly agrees. But Hamilcar has one condition. He leads his son to the sacred altar where promises are made. He tells Hannibal to place his small hand upon the offering. Close up, the boy's hand beneath his father's larger hand on the stone altar. The boy does so without hesitation. In this sacred moment, Hamilcar makes him swear a solemn vow, a promise to guide him for the rest of his life. He must never be a friend to Rome. He must hold Rome as his eternal enemy. The boy's voice, though young, is firm as he makes the oath. This was more than a father's anger. It embodied a deep rivalry between two great powers. Carthage and Rome were titans of the Mediterranean, locked in a struggle for control of trade, locked in a struggle for control of territory, locked in a struggle for control of destiny. The First Punic War ended in humiliation for Carthage. They lost land, wealth, and pride. Hamilcar saw Rome as an ever-expanding, relentless threat. His oath became a desperate strategy for survival, a legacy of resistance. So the seed of vengeance was planted. It grew within Hannibal, fed by stories of Roman arrogance and Carthaginian loss. It became the core of his being, the lens he used to see the world. This single promise, made in innocence, set him on a collision course with history. It would fuel his ambition, sharpen his intellect, and give him strength to endure unimaginable hardship. From this oath to his eventual fall, this is the story of Hannibal Barca, the genius who defied Rome. Hannibal's education was not in a classroom, but on the campaign trail. He spent his formative years in the rugged landscapes of Hispania, a world away from the comforts of Carthage. He was not shielded from the realities of war. He was immersed in them. He learned to ride. He learned to fight. He learned to endure the same hardships as the common soldiers. He ate their food. He slept on the hard ground. He marched alongside them under the baking sun. This was Hamilcar's way. He wanted his son to earn the respect of the army not through his name, but through his character and competence. And the soldiers quickly saw the father's spirit living in the son. He was a natural. Hannibal possessed a quick mind, an almost supernatural ability to grasp the complexities of a situation. He watched his father negotiate with tribal chieftains, learning the art of diplomacy and when to use a threat versus a promise. He studied the tactics of the Iberian warriors, their ambushes, their swift raids. He was quiet, observant, and always learning. While other boys his age were playing games, Hannibal was studying maps. He was learning supply routes. He was mastering the brutal calculus of war. His childhood was a masterclass in command. Tragedy struck when Hannibal was just 18. His father, Hamilcar, died in battle, drowning while covering the retreat of his sons. The command of the Carthaginian forces in Hispania passed not to Hannibal, but to his brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair. Hasdrubal was more of a diplomat than a general. He consolidated Carthaginian power through treaties and alliances, including a pact with Rome that established the Ebro River as the boundary between their spheres of influence. During these years, Hannibal continued his training, serving as a cavalry commander. He honed his skills, earning a reputation for courage and tactical brilliance on a smaller scale. He quickly became the idol of the army. The soldiers saw in him the reincarnation of his father's martial spirit. He was always the first to charge into battle and the last to retreat. He shared their dangers and their triumphs equally. When Hasdrubal the Fair was assassinated 8 years later, the army's choice for a new commander was immediate and unanimous. They did not wait for the politicians in Carthage to send a replacement. The soldiers, on their own accord, proclaimed the 26-year-old Hannibal as their leader. The boy who had sworn an oath at the altar was now a general in command of a powerful army. His time had come. With the army's cheers still ringing in his ears, Hannibal took command. He was no longer an apprentice. He was the master of his own destiny and the architect of Carthage's future. His first task, complete his father's work, subjugate Hispania south of the Ebro. 2 years of brilliant campaigns, marching, sieges, and battles, pushing deeper into the interior, confronting unmollified tribes, methods, his father's tactics, and his own audacity. Fast, unpredictable, utterly relentless. Campaigns in Hispania were a rehearsal for war. He perfected tactics that would stun Rome. He learned to use the terrain to his advantage. He mastered the art of the ambush. He coordinated complex movements between his infantry. He coordinated complex movements with his cavalry. He coordinated complex movements with his war elephants. He fought the Vacae. He fought the Carpetani. One famous battle, tricking an enemy into crossing a river at night, then ambushing them on the opposite bank with cavalry and elephants. But his greatest test came at the city of Saguntum. Saguntum, a Roman ally and strategic outpost south of the Ebro. To Rome it was a check. To Hannibal it was a provocation, a direct challenge and a violation of the treaty. He saw it as the perfect pretext for the war he'd long prepared for. In 219 BC, he laid siege to the city. He knew Rome would see this as an act of war. It was a deliberate, calculated move. The siege of Saguntum was long and brutal, 8 months. Hannibal was wounded inspecting the siege works, but he refused to rest. When the city fell, he showed little mercy. The message to Rome was clear. Diplomacy was over. The son of Hamilcar had not forgotten his oath. Roman envoys arrived in Carthage demanding Hannibal be handed over. The Carthaginian Senate, emboldened by victory, refused. The Roman envoy famously held up two folds of his toga: peace or war. Carthage chose war. The Second Punic War had begun. The die was cast. War had been declared. But Hannibal would not fight this war on Rome's terms. He would not wait for Roman legions to cross the sea and land in Africa or Hispania. His strategy was born of pure audacity. He would take the war to them. He would march his army overland, from Hispania, through Gaul, over the frozen peaks of the Alps, descending into the heart of Italy itself. It was a journey no army of this size had ever attempted. The Romans considered it impossible. They believed the mountains were a greater shield than any fortress wall. They were about to learn how wrong they were. In the spring of 218 BC, the Great March began. Hannibal gathered his forces, a vast and diverse host, nearly 100,000 men, infantry, cavalry, and most famously, 36 war elephants. This was not a homogeneous army like Rome's. It was a mosaic of peoples. Their only common bond was their commander. Hannibal's charisma and leadership were the glue, and promising them the spoils of the richest republic in the world. The scale of the undertaking was staggering. Hannibal had to secure his route, pacify hostile tribes, and ensure his army could be fed and supplied across hundreds of miles. Before leaving, he made a shrewd strategic move. He swapped troops between Hispania and Africa. Iberian soldiers to guard Carthage, African soldiers to guard his Spanish domain. This masterstroke ensured the loyalty of both garrisons. These soldiers were now hostages in a foreign land, their loyalty guaranteed by their isolation. It was a cold but brilliant calculation, a glimpse into the mind of a commander who thought of everything. And so, they marched north, a river of men and beasts flowing toward destiny. The mood was a mixture of excitement and trepidation. They were marching toward the Alps, a name whispered with fear and wonder. They were marching toward Rome, and they were led by a man who believed that for a will strong enough, nothing was truly impossible. As the army began its ascent, the warnings proved terrifyingly real. The wide, gentle paths of the lowlands vanished, replaced by narrow, treacherous ledges clinging to the sides of sheer cliffs. The air grew thin and bitingly cold. The mountain tribes proved to be an even greater danger than the terrain. They harried the long, slow-moving column relentlessly. They rolled massive boulders down from the cliffs, crushing men and crushing pack animals alike. The journey became a living nightmare, a constant battle against a hostile enemy and a hostile environment. Hannibal was everywhere. He rode up and down the column, directing the defense against ambushes, organizing the pioneers to clear rockfalls, and encouraging his weary men. In one particularly brutal ambush, Hannibal and his best cavalry were cut off from the main body of the army and forced to spend a freezing night under arms, pinned down by enemy fire from above. After 9 days of torturous climbing, they reached the summit. Below them, stretching out as far as the eye could see, was the green land of Italy. But their ordeal was far from over. An entire section of the path was wiped out by a landslide, and the army was trapped for 3 days while engineers, working in freezing conditions, rebuilt the road. The journey was breaking the army, body and soul. After 15 days in the white hell of the Alps, the ghostly remnants of an army stumbled down into the plains of northern Italy. They were alive, but they had paid an almost unbearable price for their defiance. The army that emerged from the mountains was a shadow of the force that had left Hispania 5 months earlier. Of the nearly 100,000 men who began the march, fewer than 30,000 remained. The men were skeletal figures, their faces gaunt from hunger, their bodies battered and frostbitten. They looked less like a conquering army and more like the survivors of some terrible cataclysm. But there was no time for rest. The Romans, stunned and disbelieving that Hannibal had actually succeeded in crossing the Alps, were already marching north to confront them. He had sacrificed more than half of his army to achieve one critical strategic goal: to choose the battlefield. By arriving in Italy, he had bypassed Rome's naval supremacy and its coastal defenses. Standing before his weakened and exhausted troops, Hannibal once again demonstrated his mastery of leadership. He pointed toward the distant glimmer of Rome and reminded them of the oath. They were no longer just an army. They were survivors. They were a weapon forged in the ice of the Alps, and they were now aimed directly at the heart of the Roman Republic. The first clash came at the Ticinus River. It was not a major battle, but a cavalry skirmish. Yet its outcome sent the first shockwave through the Roman psyche. Hannibal, leading his superb Numidian horsemen and Spanish horsemen, personally charged into the fray. The Roman cavalry was shattered. Scipio himself was gravely wounded, saved only by the bravery of his young son. Humiliated, the Romans fell back. They were joined by another consular army under Tiberius Sempronius Longus. Hannibal understood men like Sempronius perfectly. He knew how to use their pride and ambition against them. He laid a trap at the Trebia River. On a bitterly cold December morning, he sent his light Numidian cavalry to harass the Roman camp, taunting them, daring them to come out and fight. Sempronius, furious, took the bait. He ordered his entire army to wade through the freezing waters of the Trebia River to attack. When the frozen, exhausted Romans finally formed their battle lines, they were walking into a perfectly prepared trap. At the critical moment, Mago's hidden force charged into the Roman rear. The legions, attacked from all sides, collapsed. It was a massacre. As spring arrived, he made another audacious decision. He decided to bypass the main Roman armies and lead his army through the treacherous Arno marshes. Hannibal himself contracted a severe eye infection. The brutal conditions cost him the sight in his right eye. He emerged from the marshes like a phantom, unopposed, deep inside Roman territory. The new consul, Gaius Flaminius, was rash and overconfident. Enraged that Hannibal was now raiding the rich farmlands of Etruria, Flaminius set off in hot pursuit. Hannibal had scouted the perfect location for his next masterpiece of destruction: the northern shore of Lake Trasimene. Under the cover of a thick morning mist, Hannibal concealed his entire army in the hills overlooking the road. As the sun rose, the Roman army marched straight into the trap. Once the entire Roman army was inside the defile, Hannibal gave the order. With terrifying war cries, Hannibal's army descended from all sides. The Romans, caught completely by surprise, trapped between the lake and the enemy, had nowhere to run. It was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Rome had gathered the largest army in its history: 8 massive legions, some 80,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry. They were determined to find Hannibal and crush him with overwhelming numbers. They cornered him near a small supply depot in southern Italy called Cannae. Varro, in command on the day of the battle, saw his chance for eternal glory. He would use the classic Roman tactic, a massive concentrated infantry charge to smash the enemy center. Hannibal was counting on it. He arranged his army in a formation that no one had ever seen before. In the center, he placed his weakest troops and ordered them to advance in a crescent shape, bulging out toward the Romans. As the battle began, everything went according to Hannibal's plan. The massive Roman legions advanced. Their sheer weight and numbers pushed back the weak Carthaginian center. The Romans, sensing victory, pushed deeper and deeper into the bulge. Meanwhile, on the wings, Hannibal's cavalry had completely shattered the weaker Roman horsemen. With the Roman horsemen gone, Hannibal's cavalry then completed its circle, slamming into the back of the packed Roman infantry. At the same time, the veteran African infantry, who had been held in reserve on the flanks, turned inward, sealing the sides of the trap. The Roman legions were now completely surrounded. What followed was not a battle. It was an industrial process of killing. For 8 hours under the brutal summer sun, the slaughter continued. Ancient historians claim between 50,000 and 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed. In Rome, the news of Cannae was met with disbelief, then terror. His victory was so complete, his generals urged him to march on Rome. But Hannibal did not march on Rome. Whatever the reason, the moment passed. He had brought the most powerful republic on earth to its knees. But by failing to deliver the final blow, he gave Rome the one thing it needed: time. For more than a decade, Hannibal remained in Italy, a master of a battlefield where no one would fight him. They returned to the strategy of Fabius the Delayer. They would not face Hannibal in open battle again. The Carthaginian Senate, dominated by his political rivals, sent little support. He was cut off, an island of military genius in a sea of enemies. The Romans found a new general to match Hannibal's brilliance: Publius Cornelius Scipio. While Hannibal was pinned down in Italy, Scipio conquered Carthaginian Spain, cutting off Hannibal's primary source of men and silver. Then, in a move of strategic genius that mirrored Hannibal's own audacity, Scipio proposed to take the war directly to Carthage itself. The call finally came. Carthage, with a Roman army at its gates, recalled its greatest son to defend the homeland. After 15 years on enemy soil, Hannibal was forced to leave Italy. He had never lost a major battle there, yet he had lost the war. The final confrontation came at Zama, in 202 BC. Here, Hannibal faced Scipio. It was a battle of giants, but Scipio had studied his adversary for years. When Hannibal unleashed his elephants, Scipio's legions opened their ranks. It was Hannibal's own tactic from Cannae, used against him. For the first and only time, Hannibal was decisively defeated. The Second Punic War was over. He became a statesman in Carthage, trying to reform its corrupt government, but his enemies at home and in Rome conspired against him. He was forced into exile, a fugitive hunted by the Romans across the eastern Mediterranean. He found his final refuge in Bithynia, in modern-day Turkey. But the Romans, relentless in their hatred, pursued him even there. They sent envoys to demand his surrender. Hannibal, now an old man, was finally cornered. Rather than suffer the humiliation of being paraded through the streets of Rome in a cage, he chose his own end. "Let us relieve the Romans of their great anxiety," he is said to have declared, "since they cannot wait for the death of an old man." He drank the poison, ending the life of the man who had terrified Rome for a generation. He died as he had lived, defiant, proud, on his own terms. He had kept the oath he had sworn as a boy. He was never a friend to Rome. His legacy is immortal. He was a military genius, perhaps the greatest the world has ever known. His crossing of the Alps remains a testament to human determination. His tactics at Cannae are still studied in military academies today. But his story is more than just one of battles and strategy. It is the story of a singular will, obsessive will, against the unyielding power of an empire. He was the man who single-handedly challenged the course of history and very nearly won. He lost the war, and Rome went on to conquer the world. But in the memory of civilization, his name rings with a power that few victors ever achieve: the name of Hannibal, the genius who defied Rome,